Well, hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the channel, both friend and foe. And I know you foes are tuning in. You're not here because you think I might have a point about something. You're here to catch me saying something wrong, aren't you? Well, stick around. I just might. Who knows? And let's face it, I am the soul of tact and discretion until I'm not. And then, I might just say something you'll be able to use to hang me with. Okay. I mean, you certainly can't beat me with an argument. So maybe you can catch me at something. So stick around. Um, Everyone else, as you can see, this is a lengthy video. And, I had a choice. I could have broke it up into parts, which is kind of difficult because it's the same subject. And then I would have forced you to go hunting for the parts. So rather than do that, I'm putting it all in one lengthy video where you don't have to go looking around for it. And you could break it up yourself into parts. You decide when you want to pause it, when you want to stop it, come back. I mean, I don't, my feelings are not going to be hurt if you don't spend the full hour at the first sitting. I'm guessing this is going to go 60 to 90 minutes because it's an in-depth study. It's one I've been promising you for some time. I told you I wanted to get deep into some of the more controversial words, and this one word here, faith, what we translate as faith, pistis, G4102. That word is about as important a word as you're going to find in our Bibles. And so it is necessary that we understand it. Unfortunately, there is so much misunderstanding about this, and that's why we have umpteen denominations. That's why we're having all these debates on YouTube. But tonight, I want to go into this word in some depth. And I want to show you why, in most cases, it means faithfulness, especially when it's talking about justification. Now, I know some of you really won't care what I have to say. I mean, you have made up your mind on this issue. Nothing can change it. People like Graham Gould, you know as well as I know that if Jesus told you that the gospel concerns faithfulness to his lordship, to him being the King of Kings, and it's not just about some mental activity, some belief of who he is, but actually allegiance to him. If Jesus himself told you, Graham, that saving faith is fidelity and not just the ideology, well, you would call him a cretinous scumbag and you would block him from your channel. And, if the layman's seminary, Charles Jennings, was to get a visit from Jesus, and the Lord tried to explain to Charles, saving faith is actually fidelity to me. Fidelity to me, the King of Kings. If Jesus was to tell that to Charles Jennings would challenge him to a debate. So for you people who cannot be moved by evidence or by logic, unless you want to hang around just to see if I, say something politically incorrect that you can report to YouTube, there's no point for you to continue any further. Just go back to your own channels and continue teaching falsely. Praise I am, that's you. Go back to your own channel, continue teaching falsely, and maybe you'll hear that I said something wrong and you can use it. The rest of you, time is limited. Your time is limited. My time is limited. Let's get to the study. I have a PowerPoint with 25 slides. I'm going to try and go through it as quickly as I can, but there are times when I'm going to have to linger. And once again, if you need to, you can linger. You can pause it. You can stop it and come back to it later. My feelings won't be hurt. Let's have a look. All right, let me put my readers on. Oh, by the way, this video, for some reason, it always takes like 3 minutes before it gets clear. I don't know why that is, but hopefully by now I'm clear again. I've noticed the last few efforts, the first 3 minutes were fuzzy, and then suddenly it becomes clear. And now we got another complication tonight because what happened was a couple days ago, I saw this video of Brandon falling down after making the speech at the Air Force Academy. And I was laughing so loud, the crown of my front tooth came off. And it was off for a couple days. I finally got it cemented back on today. And so I don't know, if my speech might sound a little bit sticky here and there as the cement continues to cement. But hopefully I'll be intelligible enough. I heard actually that Brandon stumbled again today, hit his head on a helicopter. And so, I dare not watch that video until I know the cement is dry. So, but anyway, let me not digress. Again, this is going to be a lengthy one, 25 slides. But at the end of this, if you stick around, you will come away with a very different opinion of what the word faith means in our English Bibles. And if you're involved in any of these debates, if you have any opinion on this subject at all about what saves, what justifies a human being, you had better know what the noun 4102, Strong's 4102, you had better know which denotation of that noun was intended, belief or fidelity. It is a translator's choice. It is a reader's choice. And we need to make the right choice. So I'm going to try and show you that here as best as I can with the slides I put together. Let's get to them. And we go to the screen share and the PowerPoint. Let me put it up here, and then I have to expand myself to some degree here. You can see me. Uh-oh, what happened? There we are. I think I'm still up there. All right, let me go to the slide I should be on, which is number 4. Yes. All right, well, the first thing we got to get straight here is, what does the word faith even mean in English? So I took this down from the Merriam-Webster online dictionary. When we read our Bibles, we have been trained since our first days in Sunday school to think that faith is all about belief. Faith is trust. But you know what? Even in English, that is not the primary definition of faith. Let's see what Merriam-Webster has to say here. It lists number 1, the very first definition of faith is allegiance to duty or a person, loyalty, fidelity, sincerity. These are the primary definitions of faith, even in English. Then you go to the secondary denotations and you get belief and trust in, belief in the traditional doctrines of a religion. I'm not going to read the entirety of every slide. If you need to pause it, you want to read the whole thing, go ahead. I need to move it along here. Let's see. Yeah, so like I say, we're used to thinking, especially us, in the context of religion, when we use the word faith, we're always thinking faith is about belief. But again, even in English, it is very often about allegiance. And the current oath of allegiance of the United States is a great example. If you're a naturalized citizen, you need to take this oath to become a citizen of the United States. And as I have in red here, this oath includes the statement that says, I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, in other words, the Constitution of the United States. I will bear true faith and allegiance. True faith and allegiance has nothing to do with what's going on up in your head. True faith is staying loyal to the Constitution, staying loyal to the United States. So I'll give you another example here. This is, if you're elected to Congress, you would have to take this oath of office. It says, I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. So again, I will bear true faith and allegiance. It's not talking about, somebody, what they're thinking about. It's talking about their fidelity. They're going to stay loyal to this. Let me move again here. Now we have the Greek noun that gets translated faith. All right. And that word, as I've said, is pistis. And it is Strong's 4102, pistis. That is the noun. My last video, I said I was going to talk about belief. I'm going to do a follow-up study on the verb pisteo. I thought it was important to start with the noun first. So yes, the noun, which gets constructed in various forms. The basic noun, 4102 in the Koine Greek, translated as faith and faithfulness. Now, once again, in our New Testaments, whenever we see the word faith, we have been trained to think it's talking about belief. That is not necessarily the case. And again, this is how it's translated by scholars. Koine scholars, not Charlie Michaels here. Koine scholars, you can look it up yourself. It means faith or faithfulness and strong. That noun that gets translated into English as faith. All right, let's talk about Koine for a minute, the language that the New Testament was originally written in. You know, a lot of people think that the New Testament and the Bible itself was written in the King James English. No, it's actually written in Koine Greek, or Koine Greek if you prefer. Now, Koine translates to common. It's the language of the people, not the scholars. And it was developed over several centuries and served as the lingua franca of the ancient world from the late 4th century BC. It's from the time of Alexander the Great. After the death of Alexander the Great, this is the language that the known world uses all the way to the middle of the 5th century, really, in the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, the New Testament writers who lived in 1st century Judea, and their language was Aramaic, which is a dialect of Hebrew. The ancient Hebrew had been lost. They were using Aramaic. The language of Jesus and his disciples was Aramaic. But the New Testament writers, they used Koine Greek because they wished to communicate their messages to the entire world, not just their countrymen. So this language, Koine, it evolved over many centuries, and it is now what modern Greeks use today. Let's move along here. This is kind of important here. In fact, this is very important. The size of the Koine Dictionary or Lexicon is a small fraction of the size of a modern English dictionary. You need to remember that. Koine served to help disparate peoples and cultures communicate reasonably well, but compared to English, the Koine lexicon is quite limited. If you were to pick up a lexicon, Greek English lexicon, you would find about 6,000 entries, 6,000 Koine words. Now, these Koine words, each of them can be constructed in 5 or 6 different ways. A lot of them can anyway. But 6,000. Now, if you were to pick up a copy of the Oxford English Dictionary today, unabridged, you're looking at over 600,000 entries. All right. So again, the Koine Dictionary was not a comprehensive dictionary of every possible thought. It was a code which was meant to be handy so that, a lot of different cultures could share. You didn't have to know 100,000 words to communicate. 6,000 were quite enough. Give you an example here, what I'm talking about. The Koine feminine noun, sarx, G4551, and the usage, it's flesh, it's body, it's human nature, it's materiality, kindred, it's a flexible word, okay? It's a great example of how semantically elastic Koine nouns can be. In Paul's letter to the Galatians, this one noun was translated into 9 different English words and phrases, all of whose meanings partially overlapped with sarx. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. Okay, in the middle there is that's sarx in the Koine alphabet there. Now, in the letter to the Galatians, look at the different ways that it gets translated here. This one Koine noun. It can be illness, it can be flesh, it can be man outwardly. So how do you know which denotation it makes the most sense? Well, you look at the context. You look at the surrounding context. What is he talking about when he adds the word sarx? That's how you know if he's talking about human effort or if he's talking about ordinary way. So I can't emphasize this too much. When our Bibles are put into English, decisions are made. It's not like there is a one-for-one Greek word for every English word. No, there is the original Koine words, and there are meanings in English in which it overlaps. Sarx is a great example, okay? Ordinary way here on the left, that is not the one-for-one meaning of sarx. Sarx partially overlaps with the phrase ordinary way, so it can be used that way. Don't get confused when you're looking at your Bible in English. Keep in mind, the New Testament writers did not write in English. These English words are translation choices. They are possible choices. They are doing their best, or in some cases, they're driven by other motivations. But they made choices. It's not like they had a great lexicon or a big lexicon of Koine words and they just compared it, looked it up, they took the English word and looked it up in the Koine lexicon. No, they had to figure it out. What is it likely to mean in this context? Okay, so you have to keep that in mind or you're not going to understand. You're not going to understand Christianity. You're not going to understand the Bible unless you know that basic fact. The Bible was not written in English. The New Testament is not written in English. So when you hear somebody like Graham Gould tell you, belief means belief, you say to Graham Gould, sorry, sir, belief was not a word Paul ever used. Belief is an English translation. Faith is an English translation of pistis. We don't have English words in the original New Testament documents. They're all translation. And they're all, translation is an art and a science. There are rules, yes, but there's a certain art to it. It takes skill. Let me move along here before I get bogged down. And now this is the key question of this word study here. Faith or faithfulness, believe or give faith. What is that Greek noun pistis talking about? What is the gospel? Is it about belief or is it about allegiance? We have to figure this out. All right, let me read what I write here is worth repeating to you. And I'll speak it for you because the text is kind of small. Because they were engaged in religious and political revolution, the King James Version translators, like previous Protestant translators, repeatedly played fast and loose with the sacred word in order to safely arrive at predetermined soteriological and ecclesiological destinations. They cynically translated the Koine verb pisteo, very closely related to pistis, G4100, as believe, and the noun pistis, which is what we're focusing on in this study, G4102 as faith, which is an English synonym for belief. Okay, we saw above there that faith can be allegiance, it can also be belief. So The translators of the KJV put it into faith, which is ambiguous, okay? It has a couple of denotations. We have to choose which one is intended by the biblical speaker, by the biblical author. All right, as I say here, even though these words with equal and probably more lexical, contextual justification could have and should have been rendered gave faith and was faithful, gave allegiance and faithfulness. These are the possible choices the English translators had. They went with faith, they went with belief because they were rebels and they didn't want to emphasize that allegiance to religious authority was necessary. They were more, Martin Luther, of course, who preferred to have you believe it's all about belief. I'll get into him in a few minutes here. So there's lots of scholarship here. This is not Charlie Michaels telling you this. You, again, pause it if you want to look up who's also saying this. I have it in red here for you. I'm not hiding anything from you, and I'm not giving you any of my own idiosyncratic opinions about this. This is well documented that pisteo, the word that gets translated believe and belief, and pistis have meanings more than just belief and more than just faith in the sense of thinking. Okay. As I go on to say here, regrettably, agenda-driven translating choices have not ceased in the modern era either. The thoroughly Calvitarded and Lutholatrous English Standard Version, favorite of the Calvitards, isn't that right, CJ? Isn't this the one that you go to most often? Ryan Redux, English Standard Version, that's yours, right? It's your favorite? And the New American Standard Bible were careful to translate the super important phrase pistis Christo, which is used 8 times by Paul in Romans and Galatians and Philippians. This phrase, pistis Christo, is used to describe how humans are justified by God. And in the English Standard Version and the New American Standard Bible, it's translated in the objective genitive, which is hardly if ever seen anywhere in Koine. Objective genitive, meaning faith in Christ. Christ is the object. That's why they call it the objective genitive. So if you translate pistis Christo in the objective genitive, you end up with faith in Christ. That's what the ESV and the NASB do. Okay. They did so knowing that the genitive case ending, Christo, indicates possession of the noun. All right. So just very quickly about Koine Greek, one of the reasons it is a smaller lexicon is because these words can be constructed to add prepositions in effect. In this case, the subjective genitive shows possession. What we see in the phrase pistis Christo, it should be rendered faith of Christ, because the subjective genitive case ending of Christo here indicates possession. It's like of, it belongs to, faith of Christ. So Christ is the subject of the faith. And this is the way it's translated in Young's literal translation, in Dewey Rhymes, NRSV, New Revised Standard Version, updated edition, which is the one I prefer. All English translations have issues. I prefer the NRSVUE. It's easier to read, and it's usually pretty trustworthy. Again, there are issues with all English translations of the Bible, but that's the best of a bad bunch, I would say. So here we are again. Let me not overwhelm you here and put this down for a second. And let me recap. We have the English word faith. even in English, faith doesn't always mean belief. It can very well mean allegiance. In the Koine Greek, a much smaller language, this noun, pistis, pistis is the transliteration of the Greek word. All right. But it means faith or faithfulness. We have to decide which the biblical writer meant, the biblical speaker, one speaking or writing in our New Testaments. What did they mean by faith? Were they talking about belief? Or were they talking about faithfulness, allegiance? If we get that wrong, we don't know what the gospel is. If we get that wrong, we can't make a decision about once saved, always saved, free grace. All of these issues that we've been debating, all of them hang. Everything depends on getting this correct. Which denotation of pistis was intended? Which denotation of pisteo was intended? One of the reasons that they're always getting it wrong, these once saved, always saved people, Kevin's biblical discussions, praise the I am, all these people who believe in once saved, always saved, free grace, they have redefined works in such a way as to make you think that the only possible interpretation of pistis, of faith, is belief. Because if you redefine works to mean anything and everything done outside the mind to please God, if that's your redefinition of works, then it must be belief. Because if we're saved by faith, not works, faith has to be belief, because a work is something you do outside of your mind to please God. But that is the subject of another word study on ergon, the Koine word for works. Because here again, if you get that word wrong, if you think like Kevin's biblical discussions and so many of these other pious religious quacks, if you think that ergon, works, means anything and everything I could possibly do outside of my mind to please God, if that's your opinion of what works is, well, then it's real easy to decide what faith means. Faith can only mean belief. But if you have an honest interpretation of works, if you understand, and if you were to search in the book of Galatians, for example, if you were to do a word study on works in the book of Galatians, and you were to see that that word ergon is always affixed to works of the Mosaic law, works like sacrifice, works like Sabbath keeping, circumcision, deeds specifically described by the first 5 books of the Bible, the Mosaic law. If that's what works are, well, then you have you are left with the problem of deciding what faith means. You have to look at pistis and decide, is he talking about allegiance or is he talking about belief? But once again, if you think works is anything and everything you could possibly do to please God outside of your mind, then you're not worried about the interpretation, the correct interpretation of pistis. You've already made it. You've already decided what it means. It means belief. But as I will show you as we go on, the context and other factors show that fidelity, faithfulness, is almost always what is intended, especially when it's talking about our justification. Faithfulness, that is the denotation of pistis, that noun that gets translated faith. The denotation intended by the writer and the speaker in the Bible is almost always about faithfulness. I'm going to show you that as we go along here. Let me pause for a moment. All right, well, I had to pause myself there and let's go make sure the tooth is still there. Get myself a drink of water and calm down. Otherwise, Otherwise, I'll start preaching. But again, to recap, there is no one-for-one word, English and Koine Greek. There is overlap of meaning in the Koine with the English. It's not a straight one-for-one meaning. Okay, you don't have a Koine word for every English word. It'd be nice if they did. They don't. Okay, the Koine language, much smaller. It's intended to help a lot of people communicate easily. It's not an academic language where you got every possible concept in the lexicon. It's not there. Those who translate the Koine into the vernaculars of Europe, for example, they must make decisions. Which word gets translated how? And when we see this English word appear, we must make a decision. English word faith. We have to make a decision. What is intended by faith? Again, we've been trained since our earliest Sunday school days to think that faith, when you read the word faith in the New Testament, it's talking about belief in Jesus. Just belief, nothing else, because if it's more than belief, it's a work. And we've been taught again in our Protestant and evangelical churches that works are anything and everything you do outside of the mind intended to please God. Works are not specific deeds prescribed by the Mosaic law, which is the way Paul actually used that term. That was his works, was his shorthand for works of the Mosaic law. And you read the book of Galatians, you'll see I'm telling the truth about that. You look in the 3rd chapter of Romans, works is always talking about works of the law, works of Moses' law. It's not talking about helping little old ladies across the street. Okay, unless we get the correct denotation of pistis, which is translated as faith, unless we understand which denotation of faith is intended, allegiance or belief, if we don't get that right, we don't understand the gospel, and we're teaching falsely others. Okay, we don't want to do that. We're accountable for our teaching. I'm accountable for my teaching. Praise the I am, you're accountable for your teaching. Graham Gould, you're accountable for the way you interpret faith. You want to insist that could only possibly mean belief? Fine. Own that. Own that, because you will own that on Judgment Day. Now, for the rest of you who truly want to know what it means, and then know what the gospel means, let's move along back to the PowerPoint here. All right, so share the screen again. And let's see, here and up we go. And I think I'm big enough there. As I said, we have this choice to make. When we see the English word faith in our New Testaments, what is intended, faith or faithfulness? All right, let me show you something else here. Yes, we're talking about what this means for the gospel. Well, we need to decide what actually is a gospel. Now, again, since our earliest Sunday school days, we've been taught that the gospel is about how it is we get to go to heaven. But that's not what the word evangelion translated into gospel was originally talking about. Let me bring you up to speed here. In the ancient Near East, an evangelion, gospel, good news, it was a proclamation, and it was always a political message of great importance carried throughout the realm by official heralds. Gospel messages, good news messages, included important events such as major military victories, the coronation of new kings. And Paul's gospel was also similar to that. It involved political news, which was that Israel's long-awaited Messiah the anointed, the one who was supposed to take the throne of David back. The Christ, he was unjustly crucified, but he rose bodily from the dead. He later ascended into heaven, and there he was crowned the King of Kings, and he's now seated at God's right hand. Okay. The only proper response to this good news would be to give allegiance to the new King of heaven and earth. Paul's promises that those who bravely do so will be in close fellowship with the God of the universe and will surely be rewarded with life eternal. So we tend to think of the gospel as strictly as a religious message, but it was actually a political message too. And that's why Christianity, we have to understand Christianity was a politically subversive movement. Jesus was not just a religious leader, not just a holy man, not just a spiritual wise man, prophet, miracle worker. Jesus was a political figure. They don't crucify eccentric wise men, eccentric holy men. They crucify political threats, and that's what Jesus was. He claimed to be the Messiah, the long-awaited King of Israel, the one who was going to restore the Davidic Empire, the throne of David. The prophets for hundreds of years had spoke of a coming one who was going to restore the kingdom of David. The kingdom of David is 1,000 years before Christ, and it's the most extensive empire Israel had ever enjoyed. They were the dominant power of that area, of that part of the world, when King David was on the throne. His kingdom lasted for several hundred years, but when the Babylonians hauled off the Israelis, they hauled off the Jews, those of Judah and Benjamin, took them into captivity and burned down the temple. From that time on, the Jews suffered from political oppression. They were scattered throughout the world. They were under the domination of pagan powers. It begins with the 10 tribes in the 8th century who are conquered by the Assyrian Empire, Sennacherib. Again, in Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonian hordes burned down the temple in 586 BC. The Davidic kingdom has been dethroned. From that time forward, they are waiting for someone to restore the throne of David, for Israel to be restored for centuries. And this good news gospel, what Paul is saying is that Messiah, that one who's going to restore the kingdom of David, has come. He was murdered by the Romans and the Jewish temple authorities, but he rose again, and he's seated at God's right hand. He has all power. He's the king. There's one legitimate response to such news, which is to bow your knee to him. Bow your knee to the king. It's one thing to simply believe the news, but it's quite another to bow your knee in allegiance to the new king, isn't it? Let me move along here. Okay, so to proclaim the gospel of Jesus, the Messiah, the new king, and the righteousness of God, Paul, in his letters to these other churches, he has to rely on the pistis word group, faith. And this is in Strong's G4100, G4104. 4100 is the verb. You have 4102, that's the noun. You have adjectives, 4103, so forth. Paul repeatedly uses a noun borrowed from the Septuagint. That's the Greek translation of the Old Testament done between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century BC. If we simplify, we call it the 70. Septuagint, supposedly 70 scholars, all came up with the same translation of the Old Testament. But Paul repeatedly uses a noun that he borrowed from the 70 translation of Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk, and 2:4b, and the English transliteration of which is pisteos, faith, faithfulness. Pisteos is in the objective genitive, which I'll discuss in a bit. You need to understand, again, that pistis, this word group, can be talking about allegiance, not simply faith. It's very often used to talk about allegiance, about giving faith, fidelity. So here's an excerpt from this book, Salvation by Allegiance Alone, Professor Matthew Bates. And he observes that the Jewish historian Josephus, who wrote in approximately AD 75 to 100, he uses pistis, G4102, as allegiance or loyalty so frequently that I will just take a few examples almost at random. In a letter to King Ptolemy, speaks of Jews installed in positions requiring pistis, faith. In the royal court, King Antiochus praises the pistis of the Jews for their allegiance to him during a time of revolt. Pistis and the related verb pisteo, the subject of a next word study I'll do, are used with reference to matters of sworn allegiance, loyal commitment, and treason in battle. So this word that gets translated into our New Testament as faith, it's used in reference to allegiance repeatedly by the historian Josephus. And you can read the rest of it at your own leisure here. They give lots of examples in this book, Salvation by Allegiance Alone, of how this noun that gets translated faith in our New Testament, why it very often means allegiance. Okay? That's what it meant in the New Testament era. All right, so the most important verse I would think about the gospel is in Romans 1:16 and 17. This is where Paul proclaims in a very concise way what the gospel is. And he says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, the good news of Christ. For it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Now, as you're looking at my slides here, if you want to pause them, I have the King James Version language in the red. I'm using green to tell you what the original Greek word is right next to it. That's the transliteration of that original Greek word. Gospel evangelion, for example, here in the green. I'm giving you the reference number so you can look it up. You don't have to make a faith commitment to me here. Look it up for yourself if you have any doubt. In the blue, this is my own additional information that I'm adding to help you understand what is in the red. You can take it for what it's worth. You can dismiss it out of hand if you like. I suggest you seriously consider what I have here in the blue. I suggest you pause it from time to time and consider if that information in blue there helps you to understand what's in the red. I believe it will. And I believe what you see in the blue here, you cannot really understand what's in the red unless you understand what's in the blue. So let me go here again here. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, the evangelion, the good news of Christ, the executed Jewish Messiah who rose bodily from the dead. For it is the power of God unto salvation unto everyone that believeth, pisteuante, believeth or gives faith or gives allegiance. I say everyone giving allegiance to King Jesus. That's what's intended. It is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that gives allegiance to King Jesus, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Romans 1:17. Again, this is in Young's literal translation. I'm using these old translations because I know a lot of people don't trust anything that isn't old. You don't trust anything, any English translation in the 20th century. Young's goes back to the 19th century, and of course, the King James Version is in the 1700s, the last revision of it that we're using today. All right, so Romans 1:17, Paul continues with the gospel. He says, for the righteousness of God in it, that is this wonderful political and religious news, the gospel, is revealed from faith. Faithfulness is what's intended. Pisteos, G4102. The faithfulness of God the Son to God the Father to faith. Faithfulness, pistin, G4102. This is a word that gets translated as fidelity. If you look up fidelity in the King James Version, you'll see the original word is pistin. The allegiance given to King Jesus, according as it has been written in the Koine 70 version of Habakkuk 2:4. Our own Bibles is different. We don't have we're not using the Septuagint, but Paul the apostle is quoting from the Septuagint here, and he says, and the righteous one by faith will live. I'm going to read this without my own blue added information. For the righteousness of God in it is revealed from faith to faith, according as it has been written, and the righteous one by faith will live. Now the question, how do I know that Paul in Romans 1:17 was talking about faithfulness and not belief? And the answer is by examining the scripture he was quoting, which is Habakkuk 2:4b, and by examining the near and larger context of Romans 1:17. Okay. So again, this is a study that's going to take a little bit of time here. But when we do, we will see that the information I have in the blue here is the best way to understand Romans 1:17. For the righteousness of God in it, the gospel, this wonderful political and religious news, is revealed from faithfulness, that is the faithfulness of God the Son to God the Father, to faithfulness, that is the allegiance to King Jesus, according as it has been written, and the righteous one by faithfulness will live. If you understand Romans 1:17 to be talking about belief, you have a totally different gospel. Either you're wrong or I'm wrong. One of us is going to do enormous damage, and it's not me. Someone who did do enormous damage, Martin Luther. I could do a video just on this. The exegetical blunder that changed the world. Martin Luther said his entire theory of salvation was changed after spending several years reflecting on the meaning of Romans 1:16 and 1:17, the two verses we just went through. Once again, this is from Young's. For I am not ashamed of the good news of the Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation to everyone who is believing, both to Jew first and to Greek. For the righteousness of God in it is revealed from faith to faith, according as it hath been written, and the righteous one by faith shall live. You have to understand what believing means. You have to understand what faith means. If you don't, then you don't understand the gospel any better than Martin Luther did. Let's show you how Martin Luther got this wrong. Martin Luther, day and night, I tried to meditate upon the significance of these words. The righteousness of God is revealed in it. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Then finally, God had mercy on me, and I began to understand that the righteousness of God is a gift of God by which a righteous man lives, namely faith. Belief, trusting. And that sentence, the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel, is passive, indicating that the merciful God justifies us by faith, by thinking. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Now, this is Martin Luther talking. Now I felt as though I had been reborn altogether and had entered the paradise. In the same moment, the face of the whole scripture became apparent to me. My mind ran through the scriptures as far as I was able to recollect them, seeking analogies and other phrases. Just as intensely I had hated the expression, the righteousness of God, I now lovingly praise this most pleasant word. This passage from Paul became to me the very gate to paradise. Well, as I observe here, unfortunately for the world, Martin Luther, who was a much better student of Latin than Koine, Roman Catholic priests were trained in Latin, not Koine. He did not bother to investigate the source of Paul's quote, which was the Koine translation of the Old Testament prophet Habakkuk. And I see, let me put this down here for a moment. I think this might be a good place to stop here, because I'm going to show you how Martin Luther's failure to investigate the Old Testament prophet Habakkuk, since he did not understand Habakkuk, what Habakkuk meant by what the righteous one shall by faith live. He misunderstood faith and he misunderstood the gospel. And he's causing you to misunderstand what faith is. For 500 years, we've been misunderstanding what faith is, thanks largely to Martin Luther's blunder. He didn't look at Habakkuk. He didn't see what pistis meant to Habakkuk. He didn't investigate it. And the 70, it meant faithfulness. I'm going to show that to you in the next study. This one looks like it's already an hour long. I guess I'm going to make this a two-parter. Let me stop here. And again, let me just say, we have a choice. It's either faith, belief, or faithfulness. And how we translate this word will determine whether or not we have the gospel right, or we have an ear-tickling gospel, which is not going to help us or anyone else out, which is not what is intended by Paul. We have to get this word group right, this pistis word group right. There are 3 words in the New Testament. We have to get them right. We have to understand what works means. What did Paul intend when he used that shorthand works? What is meant by faith? Is it talking about fidelity, or is it talking about mental activity? What is meant by belief? Is belief allegiance? Giving faith? Giving allegiance? Or is it simply believing a set of facts? We have to get this right. If we don't get this right, we get nothing else right. All right, let me stop here because, like I said, it's at least an hour here. And I think I better stop here, because if I don't, I'll start preaching. All right, I'll stop here and give you part 2 as soon as I can. Have a good night, everyone.